return to John Boyd's discourse on winning and losing and think through what he is really contributing. The more I've thought about this, the more I think there's something deep ethically going on here, as well as interesting from a strategic point of view. We've already looked at his conception of what the world is like and what ethics and strategy have to deal with. What are the key features of the world? Well, we identified them last time. For one thing, it's many-sided. And next time we're going to talk about the various sides that you face, not only in the context of geopolitical conflicts, but also in organizations. Because a lot of the dimensions you face in international politics are dimensions that you face on a smaller scale in almost any kind of organization. There is a characteristic of rapid change. Obvious, in a sense, if you're in a dogfight, less obvious if you're in a typical organization, but nevertheless present. Things are changing around you all the time, within the organization, on the outside. Think about a company that is selling products day to day. Every day, the situation is a little bit different. It's not much different, you might think, but sales go up, sales go down. Imagine running a restaurant. What would change day to day? You've got a pizza parlor. You come out with a philosophy degree. You think, what am I going to do? You decide, well, open a pizza parlor, sell beer, talk philosophy to people as they buy beer. Okay, so there's your concept for a business. And then you think, now, how is my business going to change day to day? What do you mean, rapid change? Won't it be the same thing day in, day out? I'm reminded of somebody who actually got a PhD in philosophy and decided instead to go to work in a sandwich shop in New York City and make sandwiches. And the guy said, I stand by my decision. I've learned a lot more making sandwiches than I would have teaching philosophy. Anyway, how would things change as you run your pizza parlor day to day? What changes?
People's tastes.
People's tastes might change.
The price of ingredients.
Price of ingredients, yeah, you got to buy that tomato sauce, buy that cheese, and so on. What else?
Seasons.
Seasons, yeah. Demand for pizza is going to go up and down. I mean, for one thing, are you going to have exactly the same number of customers every day? No, right? And sometimes it'll be predictable. Yeah, Friday and Saturday is always busier, but some of it may depend on seasons. People's tastes change in the summer from in the winter. Maybe they want your thick, heavy pizza crust in the winter, and then in the summer they want light things, and you got to change the menu around a little. What else might change? Yeah. Competition. New pizza shop opens up just a mile away. That's going to affect your business. Now, you might think, look, none of this is happening super fast, but it can happen quickly, right? I mean, for one thing, a lot of this has to do with the unpredictability of this change. But in addition, suppose your waitstaff quits, or at least a key person. You've been relying on that person. They're experienced, they know the menu well, they're great with customers. They quit. Well, now the situation changes rapidly for you, and it changes in a significant way. There are all sorts of other things that we can say in general. We are facing a lot of unfamiliar phenomena. The world is presenting us with new situations all the time. And here I think Boyd's saying, look, I'm not just talking about a metaphysical view about the world at any time and any place. I mean, the pace of change has been accelerating. So a characteristic of the modern world, the contemporary world, as opposed to the world of, let's say, 500 years ago, is that we do have much more rapid change and we face many more unfamiliar phenomena. That's something that does seem to me significant. Certain human problems humans have been dealing with for millennia. But other human problems are really things that are unfamiliar, that are new. I mean, think of the things that your generation confronts that when I was your age, I didn't have to confront, and that wasn't that long ago. Well, long enough. But think about that. I mean, what is part of your life now that was not part of anybody's life in the 1970s?
Social media.
Social media is a big one, right? You actually have to think about Facebook and all of this kind of stuff. Well, you don't have to. I mean, you could ignore it all, but But lots of people do it, right? And whether you're on it or not, there are issues about all that and Instagram and so on and so forth. We didn't have that. You knew the people you knew. I mean, and if you wanted to correspond with anyone else, you had to write them a letter. And that would take like a week to 10 days to get delivered and so on and so forth. So that's something that, is very new. What are some other things that are new?
Cybersecurity.
Yeah, cybersecurity issues. I mean, we didn't even have the cyber, let alone the security issues, right? I actually, when I was in college, I had a very high-tech setup because I had an IBM Selectric typewriter. That was a rare thing, but that was the cutting edge. Now, it was already a little bit old business stuff, which is how I got it cheap. But, to have, an electric typewriter, that was like, dang, hardly anybody has an electric typewriter. Game changing, yes. And so that was something that, was a new thing then. But now, just who has an electric typewriter? I think, have my Selectric in the garage, so I haven't used it in years. But now nobody writes on one of those typewriters, much less a manual typewriter. So, a computer, that's something the Defense Department had. My college, I think, did have one computer. And it probably has much less power than my iPhone has. It took up an entire large room filled with refrigerator-sized things and huge tape drives and so on. So yeah, that sort of, the use of computers in general, and then in particular security issues involving them, all that is new. Other unfamiliar phenomena that when I was your age, I didn't have to deal with. Or didn't have the opportunity to deal with. It's not all bad. Yeah.
Climate change.
Actually, climate change was a huge issue in the 70s, but it's because the 70s were so cold. It was record-breaking cold. And there were all these articles on global cooling and the coming ice age and so forth. So I actually took some courses on climate science back in the 70s. But then it was all, we're all going to be Eskimos. So climate change in the broad sense was a thing, but it actually had an effect on me in a personal way, in the sense that I told my brand new wife, we were moving to Pittsburgh. I was already there, but she was coming to Pittsburgh, and I said, oh, you'll love it. It's so much warmer than Connecticut. Well, then, the first winter we were there, record-breaking snowfall. And then the next winter, record-breaking cold. And so she was like, this is much worse than Connecticut. And it was really terrible. I mean, it snowed all the time. It was, the worst, now I'm digressing totally, but in the winter of 1962, one morning I remember my mother dressing me up to go to school. It was 17 below outside, okay? And so, it was one of those things where you've seen A Christmas Story. It was like that, okay? Because I had to walk about a mile to school, uphill, of course. But, it was minus 17. And so anyway, it was pretty, it wasn't quite that bad in the late 70s, but it was still really cold. So that was kind of a thing, but in a different way now. Other things that, yeah.
Gene editing, not like dog selection, but literally.
Yeah, good, exactly. Editing the Human Genome Project, the idea that you might actually be able to give people genetic treatments, understanding genetic components to lots of things. I mean, we knew what genes were, but we still thought of it on the level of breeding dogs, or, hey, look at the colors of these flowers, right? It had the idea that you could really trace down within a human being what was doing what was barely dreamed of. Other things, yeah.
Just instant access to information.
Yes, exactly, instant access to information. A huge amount of being a student when I was in school was spending time in the library, right? You had to do that. That's where the books were. That's where all the information was. Sitting in your room, gosh, we didn't even have telephones. There was one telephone on the hall in our dorms. You couldn't have a phone in your room, much less one that you carried around with you. And that meant if your parents called or something, somebody at the end of the hall had to come and get you and then everybody in the hall heard your conversations. But to read a book, you had to go to the library. And to look up a journal article, you had to go to the library. And photocopying was very expensive. You couldn't make a photocopy for yourself. You had to read it there. So all of that was, in fact, I mean, even when I was in grad school, they advised us, make copies of your paper in case anything happens to the one you turn in. But it was so expensive to do that, I never did. And it didn't bite me until I was in grad school and took a course on Aristotle and turned in the paper. And then about 4 months later, I saw the professor on the elevator, and I said, by the way, I never got a grade for that paper. And he said, I never received a paper from you. I said, no, you did. I gave it to you. You were in your office. I said, I don't remember it. And then I saw him a day later. He said, I don't know where your paper would be. I can't find it. So I came in to see him in his office, and I said, well, I'll tell you what you did with the paper. I handed it to you. You were sitting at your desk. You took it and you put it in a pile of paper behind you. I said, let me look. There it was. It was still untouched in that pile of paper. So, luckily. Sorry?
Was he embarrassed?
He was embarrassed. I got an A minus on that paper. Like the worst grade I got in grad school. Well, anyway, from anyone in that department, I made the mistake of taking courses in other departments, and that never worked out well. Okay, so anyhow, things do change, and we're faced with an increasing proportion of unfamiliar phenomena. And some of them are big things like the things we've been talking about. Some of them are minor. In the 70s, you wanted to put the window up or down in your car. You had to crank the thing, right? None of this pressing a button. Now my wife's car, you don't even have to put the key into anything. You just walk near it and press a button, and it lets you in. What's this magic? It's astounding. I mean, to me, it's a new thing. My car has a CD player now. It's like, wow, that's awesome. I mean, forget Bluetooth and all that. For years, I drove a 92 Miata that had nothing like that. People would say, oh, well, listen to the CD in the car. Are you kidding me? Who has a CD player in the car? Well, almost everybody else in the United States, except for me. Anyway, these things are features of the world that we deal with now. All of this, and we talked last time about the unpredictability. If you want to look at this, think about and look at the displays people had in the 50s and 60s especially. Futurism was a big thing, not in that early part of the century violent Italian way, but just these visions of the future. But look at what they thought the future would be like. For one thing, it looked a lot like 1957. But the cars flew. Or think of that, watch the Jetsons cartoon show. They would have robot dogs and automated walkways in their houses, and the houses would be way up in the air because you could fly to them and stuff like this. Well, that's not what the future turned out to be like at all. And so the way things go is really pretty unpredictable. Who could have predicted any of this stuff? Finally, what it means is we're constantly dealing with uncertainty. The world is presenting us with decision-making under uncertainty. A lot of the games we've been studying are games of perfect information. You assume that in the prisoner's dilemma, the prisoners understand the game, and they know what decision each of them is facing. But in the real world, we often don't even know what game we're playing. We don't know the payoffs to the players. We don't even know what our options are. And then we don't know how to predict what's going to happen. So as a result, everything we're dealing with is highly uncertain. At best, we have probabilities, but actually often we don't really have probabilities. What right now is the probability that you will get an A in this course? Now, some of you might say, 100% or 0%. But for lots of people, it's kind of like, well, I've got lots of evidence given my current average, but I don't know. At least, but now how would you put a number on it? Oh, well, in my case, I think the percentage is 93.7%. We don't think in those terms, right? At best, we have these general qualitative things. That seems likely. That seems unlikely. I think that's totally reliable, etc. So we're facing uncertainty all the time. So as we saw last time, what does it mean we need to deal with this? Well, we talked about a variety of things: adaptability, flexibility, speed. And if we think about that speed in responding, and here notice, not just as individuals, but as organizations, we have to be able to respond to changing circumstances quickly and be highly flexible and adaptable. That means a number of things. One of them is we've got to be highly intuitive. We've got to develop intuitive responses. I mentioned last time that pilots tended to hate Boyd because he wanted them to think about OODA loops when they were busy actually doing piloting. But really, his own theory implies the whole point of this is to get your responses intuitive. That is to say, you get to the point where you don't have to think about the OODA loops. You don't have to think about strategies. Instead, it's all intuitive. It's built in. Now, part of the reason for this is that if we're facing rapid change and things are unpredictable, analysis, well, what's wrong with analysis? What's wrong with saying, wait, let's think this through?
Everyone's going to get ahead of you.
Everyone's going to get ahead of you, right. It takes too long to think it through, first of all. What else is a problem?
Isn't speed a problem by itself? Because if you make quick decisions, but it's the wrong decisions, you end up losing anyway. You know, like if he's in a dogfight and he turns right real quick and runs into a mountain without checking. Then
Right, good point. Okay, good point. So notice what we do in situations like the ones he's envisioning. We have to react quickly, but we have to act correctly. And there is a tension here, right? You might think, wait, the faster I do this and the more intuitive, the less I rely on actual analysis and thought and careful observation, the more likely I am to make a mistake. So how do we properly balance that concern for speed with a concern for getting it right? Yeah.
we use a muscle memory. So like, say you're playing football or something like that, and you like go through whatever you're supposed to do over and over again to the point to where it's second hand. So as soon as you see them react within that second, you already know what to do. So it's automatic.
Good, good, yes, exactly right. Think about being trained in football. You've got to learn to respond in a certain way. You don't have time to really think it through every time. But on the other hand, at the beginning you do. It's part of the reason that actually learning to do certain things like that is really difficult. And teaching people to do things like that is difficult. Because at first they have to think about everything. And eventually it gets to the point where it becomes automatic. So here I think it's helpful to think about something from Aristotle, actually. How is it that we develop virtues in Aristotle? We start out through conscious effort. We start out looking at something and saying, I'd like to be able to do that. I want to be like that. So we start out really in stage one thinking, okay, here's a model for what I'd like to do. It might be a role model who's a person exhibiting this, but maybe it's a task, right? You think, I want to be able to do that. I want to be able to make my airplane do that. Or I want to be able to speak that effectively. I want to be able to interact with people as successfully as that person does. I want to be able to do logical proofs as well as that person. Whatever the task is, it doesn't really matter. It might be physical, it might be mental, but you have some model. That's what I want to be able to do. And then, what do? You consciously try to do it. And Aristotle says, look, at this point you're faking it. I have some friends who are significantly older than I am and who have never been physically active at all. They're, to be blunt, really out of shape. But they started taking a Tai Chi class. Well, to hear their descriptions of trying to learn Tai Chi, it's pretty hilarious, actually. And things they find very difficult. Now, I don't know anything about Tai Chi, but I've watched, movies in which people have done these moves. And actually, we had a choir director one time who used to do these weird Tai Chi moves as part of choir rehearsal. So anyway, they're trying to describe something, and so you have to do this. And oh, you mean like that? And they're like, oh, how can you do that? It was like, well, I saw him do that. And I thought, oh, that was cool. Or whatever. And I realize I'm doing it badly. I'm not really trying, but that's the point. I mean, it's like, yeah, look, if you really have to think about it, or if in football you think, okay, then, let's say you're the quarterback. You think, I should go back up. Oh, I should probably go over this way. Now I see that person over there. I should maybe, you're sacked by the time you think about any of this, right? All of that has to, so here's the thing. You do this enough. You practice until that becomes a habit. And then you keep practicing until finally it is second nature. That is to say, it's absolutely automatic, absolutely intuitive. It's just, of course, what you do. Now, actually, a good model for this is, and one that Aristotle uses, learning to play a musical instrument. You're learning to play the instrument. At first, maybe somebody inspires you. You hear someone play the piano, and you think, wow, I wish I could play the piano like that. Then you think, well, how do I do it? You consciously have to try. And it's hard. You think, wait, that's a C. Here's middle, okay. And it's all conscious. And that's for 2 beats. Boom, boom. Okay. You have to do all that consciously, but then you practice. And every time it's sort of taking those neural pathways and reinforcing them. And so you practice, finally it becomes a habit. You look at the page and you just say, bum, bum, bum. And it's habitual, but you keep practicing, you get better and better at it until it's second nature. And once it becomes second nature, actually, sometimes you forget this stuff altogether. I found that when I was teaching my kids things, certain things I could teach them, certain other things I couldn't teach them. They were just second nature. It's like, I don't know, you want to learn to play the piano. Well, here's music. Play it. It's like, wait, I have to, well, like, what's the problem? That's a G. Just play a G. And I kind of forgot how I was taught all that, right? It was like second nature to me. And later, something like that happened. I had to learn to improvise. I was part of a group where, part of what we did is play Baroque music, but we played it over Baroque grounds, and then we just made up the rest. So I had to learn to just improvise parts over this very general pattern. And then at certain points, part of the thing was just, okay, 5 minutes. I need 5 minutes of just improvised stuff. And if you're used to sitting down and playing in front of music, that's at first terrifying. Wait, I've just got to make it up as I go. That's really scary. But what happens? First, you consciously think, well, how do people improvise? What do they do? How do I think about that? And then you practice it, and you practice it, and you annoy people by, saying to the people you live with, give me a key. And they say, B flat. It's like, okay. And then you just practice improvising for 5 minutes in B flat or something, until it becomes a habit. And you keep doing it until finally it becomes second nature. And it's no longer, I remember being so impressed the first time I saw someone sit down at the piano, being told, improvise. And he just said, well, what key? B flat minor. Okay. So he just improvises in B flat minor. I thought, oh, I'd love to be able to do that. Well, now I can do that. But I've sort of forgotten all that conscious stuff I learned about it. And actually, in this case, and this might be relevant to this question of speed, in this case, I found it corrupted me in the following way. Now I sit down in front of a Bach fugue. And it's not that I forgot how to play it. I don't want to play it. It's like, don't write out the notes. Just give me a few chords and I'll make it up. and it's like, it takes a different kind of character. It takes a different, you have to be experimental here and here you got to do what's written. And those are different mindsets. And so sometimes having one mindset become second nature can make it difficult to do other things. I think that's part of the reason the pilots hated Boyd, because he was coming around doing this kind of thing. And they were saying, we don't have the patience for that, man. We're doing this. And they already have a lot of that as second nature. So that's how you get, the combination of speed We could say plus accuracy. But the speed without going through all of that, that's very dangerous. If I just say, look, it's really important in conversation to be a good conversational participant that you respond quickly. And so just say the first thing that comes into your head. That's probably not wise, right? I mean, I'm assuming here that you're not a normal person, that you're like socially awkward and you're trying to learn to converse with people. You've been like the nerd who can't deal with, you're like Sheldon Cooper or something. And, I'm trying to teach you how to interact normally with people. Well, the first thing that pops into your head, that's not the thing you should say, right? You've got to have some models, you've got to consciously think, how do I do this, and so forth. And eventually it becomes second nature. Now, if that's a little too weird an example, think about just going up to somebody you've never met. You're at some party or whatever, and you think, well, I should circulate. How do you do that? At first, that's pretty scary. But you might think, well, what do I do to actually go over and just introduce myself and start talking? And eventually you get to the point where, oh, that's no big deal. But at first, that's scary. Okay, so the point is this. You're absolutely right. There is a tension between speed and accuracy. How do we get them together? We get them together in the way that people undergoing athletic training or musical training or other kinds of training do. We go through something like this process that Aristotle describes. And eventually things do become second nature. Now, we've talked earlier in the course about these two systems. System one, that is highly intuitive, that's largely unconscious, that's very fast. And then system two, this system that is, on the other hand, structured, you might say, as opposed to intuitive, that actually involves reasons, thinking through plans and so forth. It is very much conscious. We have to think things through. And it's rather slow. So one thing that I think Boyd is trying to stress is we need to focus a lot more on this than people often do. It's not to say we can ignore this. In fact, the point, though, he says, is this needs to feed back into that. Of course, we use our intuitive responses in structuring our theories. We don't ignore our intuitions, for example, about what's right and wrong, independently of our intuitive response. I mean, we use our intuitive responses about right and wrong to build our theories. On the other hand, the theory should feed back into this in a certain way so that we actually do become intuitive and respond quickly and unconsciously. But accurately, this needs to be an interaction with system two. And we have to actually use this to help us develop skills at this level. So the point would be, it's not that this is just given to us. And then we build this, and then it's like, when do we use one, when do we use the other? It's rather that if we live in this kind of world, we're going to often have to rely on this. But it shouldn't be a totally random thing, whatever pops into the head. Though evolution gives us a big head start, we're going to have to help use this to shape it. And indeed, that's what a lot of military training, athletic training, musical training, any kind of intellectual training or non-intellectual training involves. Okay, now if that's right, what does that tell us about the nature of ethics and the role of ethical theory? So yeah, what does this tell us about the role of ethical theory and its relation to this? We've seen the contrast between intuitionists like W.D. Ross and people who have highly structured theories like Bentham and Mill and Kant and so on. So take a step back. If Boyd is right, in a sense, we don't want to sign up for team intuition or team theory. We want there to be a certain interplay, right? Yeah.
You want to teach your managers at first what the right thing to do is, but you don't want them for decades to have to refer to a manual or to think from first principles what the right thing to do is. They should just be able to conjure up the right response.
Good. That's exactly right. We use this in part to inform our intuitive responses. Now in ethics, unlike some things, we actually start with a set of intuitive responses. In music, we really don't. I mean, it's not as if you just take people and sit them in front of a piano or a saxophone, and evolution has meant, well, they can kind of do something. a friend of mine became extremely good at playing the viola da gamba. And one day he wasn't around, but he left his gamba in the practice room. So I went in and thought, well, it looks like a big guitar. I bet I can play it. So I pick it up, take the bow. I couldn't make it make any noise at all. I mean, at all. It's not that it made bad noises, it made no noise. And the same thing has happened when somebody said, here, try playing this trombone or this clarinet. I can't make it make noise. I can tell you, evolution, at least in my case, has not helped with any of this, right? I can't even make it go, it was impossible. And so I don't even know how people begin to do those things. But in ethics, we start out with a given system one, but it doesn't have to stay there. It gets shaped by all those factors he was mentioning. Yes, to some extent by our genetic heritage, as evolution has given us a certain set of intuitive responses, but also in terms of culture, in terms of education, training, and so forth. So we use those theories, and then we come back here and we shape our intuitive responses in light of those theories. Now, in an organization, it might mean we start with a code of ethics. We actually have, for one thing, we try to hire people who do have a certain, it seems like, intuitive background, but then we have a code of ethics. We try to teach people specifically what in this kind of role, in this kind of context, they should do and not do. It might be something that has a strong relation to some of the theories we've looked at, but it might be quite different. It might be all about how to avoid conflicts of interest as an accountant, or as an investment manager, or as an attorney, or whatever, and be much more specific. But then we want people who develop some intuitive sense of all that, who don't have to consult the manual all the time. Think of driving. You have some intuitions about driving just based on ordinary responses about moving around the world, but a lot of it you have to learn in this sort of way, and yet once you've actually gotten used to operating cars and gotten used to the rules of the road and so on, a lot of that is intuitive. You don't have to think about it. Yesterday, I had to drive my wife's car to Houston because I was all set to drive my Miata and the battery was dead. So I took her car. And all of a sudden, these things that are automatic for me became not so automatic. I mean, actually, I'm reversing the metaphor here because my Miata's a manual. Her car is an automatic. But it's like, you start it by just pressing this button, you know, and the brake is just this thing, and then it has cruise control, and it's like magic all over the place. And so I had to kind of learn how, like, I got to turn on the windshield wipers. How do I do that? I don't know. I know how to do it in my car. So some of that has to be relearned when you have a new car to drive. But other things, you know, you don't think about it at all. I don't have to think, how do I turn the car when I get into my car? And all of that becomes just highly intuitive. So what this suggests is that in ethics, we shouldn't think just in terms of intuition. We shouldn't think just in terms of theory. They have to inform one another. In something like the process Rawls calls reflective equilibrium, because once we've revised our system one and have new intuitions, well then we can think about our theories again and say, oh, you know what, that theory we had at the beginning, I now think that's too simple. I now see it this way and that way. Just as in music, you might learn something at one point, and then later you think, well, yeah, but actually I think this sounds better. And so you do something different that initially wasn't what you learned to do. And all of that is something that involves this, as it were, constant interplay among these kinds of things. Well, that I think is one moral we can get out of this. Moral for morals, if you will. But now, there's something else that I think is going on here. And this is the part that's highly negative. So there's a negative program to what Boyd is proposing and a positive program. It's always more fun and easier to start with the negative. So let's start with the negative part. We're trying to win. We're trying to beat an opponent here. Now notice that's different in music. It's not like playing a musical instrument. You might be in a piano competition or something, but ordinarily you're not trying to beat anybody. However, in a battle, in a conflict of some kind, you are trying to win. So part of it is getting your intuitive responses so that you are adapting to change, responding quickly and accurately to unpredictable, unfamiliar phenomena. But now, what about your opponent? Let's assume they're not in some separate room, but you're interacting with your opponent here. What do you want them to do? What do you want to do to them? Yeah.
Have them consciously try, have them intuitive to keep the unpredictable.
Okay, good. One thing is to try to force them to be conscious and to use system 2 where you're using system 1. Make them do this. How would you do that? Yeah.
Being novel, not doing things that aren't used to.
Good. So I want to confront them with novelty, right? If the problem is unpredictable, unfamiliar phenomena, I want to hit them with things that are unpredictable. I want to hit them with things that are unforeseen. And so I do want to behave unpredictably. I want to confront them with unfamiliar circumstances. I want to confuse them. Because when do we tend to go from system 1 to system 2? What makes us construct theories in the first place? Oh, all right. People said a number of good things, so one at a time.
Are heuristics aren't useful anymore because it's a new circumstance?
Okay, good. One of the things that can drive us to this is something new, something novel. What else?
Just when we don't understand the situation.
That's right. We can have a lack of understanding. We realize, wait, I don't know what's going on. That can happen.
Like protesting. Really protesting.
These are unhappy grad students who want to be paid more. So,
Makes sense.
yeah, I was on a committee that studied this problem for a year. And grad students are paid very differently in different departments of UT. So in some departments, this is well justified and they get very little money. Other departments take care of their grad students pretty well. So it's a weird problem. It makes that actually super hard to solve because if you say, we'll just raise compensation across the board, actually the problem is only in these places. Some departments have lots of additional funding, so it's a mess. It's very hard to do. Not only takes lots of money. Anyway, I'm sympathetic with them, but it's a harder problem to solve than a lot of people think. Our committee would have made a lot more progress in a year had it been an easier problem. Anyhow, okay, so we go back to this. We want to confuse the opponent, right? We want to hit them with something new, something they don't understand. So we want to confuse people. There is a phrase that Patricia Greenspan uses at the beginning of a paper of hers that I'm especially fond of in this connection. When in doubt, complicate. That was actually part of my management strategy. When in doubt, complicate the situation. Make it more complex. Confuse your opponent. Okay? You prefer candidate A to candidate B. Throw C, D, and E in the mix. Okay? Don't walk in with a clear agenda of the meeting. Let it seem to be a sea of confusion. Okay? I didn't always do that, but there were times when I did that. Why did I do that? Because I knew what to follow. Okay? I figured, look, I can respond quickly to the changing situation. They're going to be confused by it, first of all. And secondly, they don't know what ball is the ball that I am really watching. So here it is. You know, let's say a basketball gets tossed into the room. I'm trying to get the basketball. Well, if you all know, get the basketball, and there's one ball, well, fantastic. You know, you all are competing, I'm probably going to lose. But if I can say, let's toss 50 balls in the room, and they'll all look alike to you, but I know which one I care about. I know which one has the gold inside it or something. Then I know which basketball to follow. And while everyone else is confused by all the action, I know to grab that as the situation changes. And so that can often help. For one thing, you understand the factors you're complicating it with. The other side doesn't. For another, that even if they can figure it out, initially that will create a tremendous amount of confusion. And that confusion is something you can use to your advantage. It forces them into system 2 thinking, whereas you can still respond to the changing situation because you understand the structure of it. So that's something that will really inhibit the opponent's ability to adapt. We need a variety, right? If I want to hit them with new things, I want to have a variety of things in my repertoire so that they don't know what I'm doing. And that means, I guess this goes along with unpredictability. I need to have a variety of things I can do in response. Let's say, well, actually, I don't know how many of you watch the Pro Bowl in football. Almost nobody does. Why? It's terrible. Boring. Why is it so boring? Well, yeah, part of it is that nothing's at stake. Part of it is that it's like nothing, the Super Bowl's coming up after it and everybody's watching that basketball, and that football, and nobody cares about this one. But part of it is that, look, they don't have any time to prepare. These people come from different teams. No team is going to share its playbook with other teams. So what plays can they actually learn to run together in a very short period of time? Not very many. So there's very little variety in the plays. It's like, should we run or should we pass? To the left or to the right? That's more or less, there's nothing very interesting you can do. And as a result of that, it's just kind of boring. It becomes highly predictable. But since the other side can predict what the other side is going to do, just nothing very interesting happens. It's hard for anyone to do anything dramatic or win in that setting. So it all becomes dull. Well, here, we don't want it to be dull. We don't want to lose. We want to actually win. We want to defeat the opponent. So we've got to exhibit variety. Now, the other thing is, well, yeah, we want to confuse people, hit them with new things, a variety of things, make them unpredictable, unfamiliar, complicate them, confuse them, force them down into this. Are there other things that would force us into system 2? Or would slow down, confuse, mess up the opponent? This one isn't so easy to recognize, but it has to do with something that doesn't really affect us as individuals, but it does affect us as organizations. I, much of the time anyway, know what's going on in my own mind, but I don't know what's going on in your mind. I've got to communicate with you in order to know what you're doing and you're thinking. If we disrupt the opponent's ability to communicate, that's going to force them into thinking more consciously because the different parts of the organization are not going to be able to coordinate the way they're supposed to coordinate. So in addition to confronting the opponent with novelty, we want to disrupt their ability for coordinated action. Now, how could we do that? Well, mostly by attacking communication. Suppose we are actually in some musical competition. We're in a battle of the bands. And we do our thing, we perform. And then we go off stage and we think, all right, our tough competition is coming up later. We want to mess them up badly. How could we do it? We might think, they all rely on these monitors to be able to hear one another. Let's mess with the monitors. Let's make it so the guitarist can't hear the drummer. Let's make sure nobody can hear what the piano player is doing, etc. That can mess up that. I mean, look, a band of the kind I'm talking about is a pretty simple organization in a way. But you make it impossible for people to hear one another. It's really difficult. In recording studios, everybody's off in their own separate room. And so they can't directly hear one another. You hear what the other musicians are doing through headphones to keep all the sounds distinct and separate and so on. But that can mean anything that messes up those headphones is really going to mess up what you're doing in the recording. And it's all highly artificial anyway, which is part of the reason that live things are often much more interesting than the studio versions. It's because gosh, it feels very artificial. And to make it worse, a lot of people in a recording studio will play along with some click the there's some mechanical thing that keeps everybody together. I don't do that, but some people do that. And that's something that really can mess you up too, because you're coordinating with this thing instead of with each other. And so if you mess with communications, that makes it really hard. Then all of these things have to act as independent units, and it's hard for them to stay focused on one goal. Yeah.
You feed false information to divide and conquer.
That's right. It really comes down to this. Strategies that involve divide and conquer. And that's something that may involve attacks on communication, but it may involve other things. I got to create division in my opposition. How do I divide them? One way might be, let's say it's my political opposition. I want to find issues that will divide them. So I'm going to stress these things that will be wedge issues, dividing them apart from one another. I find that, let's say I'm a Republican, I want to find out how to mess up the Democrats. I think, where do the Democrats disagree? Not where do they disagree with me, where do they disagree with each other? I'm going to press those things and force them apart. Or, I see that the enemy has a strong encampment here, I see that they have a strong encampment here, I divide. I go in between them, try to force them to deal with things separately.